you very much. So, like I said, we're going to try and keep it real for you guys, trying to get to the core of what it is Rich is trying to say. So instead of starting with an initial question, I'm going to start with my last question, and then I'm going to ask you it again at the end of the interview. So my last question was going to be, if you want these guys to have one takeaway, the one thing you want them to know that Core is doing, that you want everybody to know, what would it be?
So the one takeaway is that Core is here to scale Bitcoin. This is a multi-decade play, and there's just so much left to be done. There's been so much progress already, but I honestly think we're 1% of the way through the mission. And for this audience, there's a lot of builders here, there's a lot of community participants here, whatever. It's going to be a journey, but we're super happy that we have so many loyal Cortoshis that are part of our ecosystem, and we're here to build that future with you guys together.
Wonderful. Now, as Bitcoin becomes more and more versatile, as the word adoption, if you think about it, we're not going to say adoption anymore soon. It's adopted. Everybody wants to have it. Everybody wants to be in. How is this changing the way you take on projects, execute projects, select projects when it comes to Core?
So Core is an open and decentralized network, so again, anybody can build on top of Core. But I think that the premise to your question, and we're going to get spicy at the very beginning, I would actually disagree with. I think Bitcoin is now commonplace in that people know about it and we have some adoption, but I don't think we've hit anything like hyper-Bitcoinization, which is really what got me into the space back in 2013. Mm-hmm. And Core's mission is to get billions of people onboarded into Bitcoin. That's never going to happen on Bitcoin L1. It's too slow, it's too expensive, it's not expressive enough. That by default needs to happen on a scaling solution like Core. And I think what we're going to see is people borrowing against their Bitcoin on places like Core and using dollars in the form of leverage. And that's actually how you're going to see billions of people that have no access to banking or underbanked today actually get financial freedom, actually get rid of these middlemen. And I think that will be adoption.
At the end of the day, many different efforts across Core. How do you measure success? When do you say, hey, this is successful, this went well, let's try and replicate this? Is there a measure of success when it comes to your own definition of success within Core?
I feel like this was a plant from the Core team to get me to give more pats on the back. But no, I mean, I think the team's done an amazing job. I'm responsible for a very, very little piece of it. Yeah. And I think by most public perception, Core has succeeded, right? By being number one in every Bitcoin category. I think internally we view that very differently because we measure ourselves against the most interesting, most successful tech companies generally, not just blockchain projects. Yeah. And I think Core's mission is just so big where to unlock Bitcoin, that's $1 trillion market. This business itself can be spitting off hundreds of millions in free cash flow in the next 5 years if we actually get to the scale that we want to get to, if we can be providing yield on hundreds of billions in the Bitcoin ETF. Like there's just a real business there, and I think that's one of the reasons that we view ourselves with this very strategic lens, is that there is just such an amazing opportunity here, an untapped market. And I think until we have market share that's comparable to the Bitcoin asset base itself, I think we'll consider our job unfinished.
You're talking about $1 trillion market. Wonderful. But how do you strike a balance between trust and engagement in $1 trillion market? How do you protect people? How do you ensure security to foster this trust and to increase engagement in this market?
So trust is one of those things in crypto that is just totally lacking, right? And it's a don't trust, verify, right? And that's been the phrase since the very beginning, and one of the things that also got me into crypto. And I think in general, Core always tries to strive for the highest level of security. And I think this is best exemplified by our non-custodial Bitcoin staking, which is you're just using native Bitcoin time locks, you're never sending it to a multi-sig, there's no custody risk. And that's the first product that was built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoin yield. And this is actually what got the BitGo deal done. It's the inside baseball of the story, if you will, it was through a conversation with the CEO of BitGo and jamming on all things Bitcoin to help build that trust, where many of these other yield products are much more for Ethereum folks, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I spent a lot of time in the Ethereum ecosystem, but they're comfortable with the risks that Bitcoiners aren't. Yeah. And we pride ourselves on building products that live up to that, and we will continue to do so. And that's also why the Core ecosystem has 75% of the Bitcoin hash rate. It's got almost $1 billion in Bitcoin that's staked that also protects the network, right? And it's, again, trying to do things the right way, even it might be a little bit slower at times, because ultimately that's how you build trust with this Bitcoin asset class, and that's how eventually we'll unlock just so much more of this capital base.
As you keep building this trust, you need to expand. To expand, literally we're talking about network expansion. How do you mitigate risk? How do you make sure governance remains in place as you keep expanding?
So a lot of this is organic, and I think that's one of the most interesting part of these emergent systems is that you can try your best to plant a lot of seeds, but you don't necessarily what's going to grow. Yeah. And I think we've tried to partner really closely with some of the folks in our ecosystem to try to do as much as we can to help some of these projects grow. But despite that, most of it is just organic, and I think we will continue to foster that with our Ignition program, with these other go-to-market collaborative motions to try to go and create the healthiest ecosystem. And if you look at Core, there's 1 billion in TVL, there's hundreds of thousands of daily active users. Some of those are emergent properties, and we want to see more and more of that where we never even met these teams by the time they launch. And I think that will be a big measure of success, is just how many of these things can fully onboard and get to critical mass and ultimately build real businesses on top of Core. And that's one of the ways that our network has grown so much, is that there's actually a place for people to build real businesses. If you look at many of the other Bitcoin scaling solutions, there actually is no possibility of building a real business because there is no users. Yeah. But in the Core ecosystem, there's like 8.5 million Cortoshis, right? Like that's enough where just the doubling factor of that over the next cycle, you're talking about maybe the largest blockchain ecosystem generally, right? And, exactly. And that's a very unique path to market based on the fair launch that we did. And we'll continue to do that by building some of these more retail use cases and trying to align ourselves with it, like stablecoins.
Very good. We're in Abu Dhabi. This is the first time there's ever been a crypto event in Abu Dhabi, inaugural event. Core has made a point of being here. You've made a point of having a fireside chat, sitting down and trying to bring this to Abu Dhabi. Why?
So we're super long in this region generally. I think there's a lot of untapped potential here, and there's just so much interesting economic activity that's going on here. There's a lot of Bitcoin mining, there's a lot of folks that are very familiar with Bitcoin, and I think our staking product is, it's essentially rocket fuel for this region. And I think it's a largely untapped market. People haven't wanted to do the groundwork, they haven't wanted to actually make the local relationships. And with our Bitcoin staking product in general, that's like the gateway drug, if you will, into Bitcoin DeFi. Yeah. And the idea there is start with the strongest trust assumptions, get used to yield, then become a dual staker, start to get active on both sides of the Core ecosystem and the Bitcoin ecosystem, get higher yields, and then eventually get into Bitcoin DeFi. Yeah. And that path, I think we're showing is a maturity spectrum as you bring people along that. And I think what we've realized in this region is a lot of people that are just at the beginning of that phase. Mm-hmm. And that's actually the perfect time for Core to go focus on that market, because we want to win the mind share at that point and then scale with these people and keep providing them the best products as we go along that. And that's a very interesting competitive spot for us to be in versus maybe some of these other regions that have a lot more competition, that are not maybe fully saturated, but are starting to become saturated, at least from a market share, mind share point of view. Also, for the marketing team, we did the second crypto event in Abu Dhabi. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, you should, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin Magazine is the first ever that actually brought such a big event here. So, as you were saying, you're not only doing adoption, you're also doing education. You're trying to actually foster education, foster adoption. In the Bitcoin ecosystem, the developments that you're bringing to the table. Name one that you're saying, hey, this is the one everybody should know about. And also, tell me about one that you have in the back of your mind that you hope will become a reality.
So, and I'm a little bit of a broken record here, but I do think staking was a game changer. And we're the first Bitcoin staking product, the only one that's hit real scale with real yield. And that was just this massive unlock. Like, as a Bitcoin holder, I've been looking for something like this for 5, 7 years, a very long time, right? And we've all known people that got hurt in BlockFi, Genesis, Celsius. People just don't want that. I think that's good for the space, right? I think as soon as this bull market, we see centralized lenders and like yield products come back, that's when you should probably sell, just historically. Although there's some mania afterwards, but it's hard to top tick. I think the second piece that you mentioned is something we've just started to talk about, we're very excited about, is local fee markets. Oh. And local fee markets have been popularized in the Solana camp. It's like essentially pseudo local fee markets, but it's at least a step in the right direction, which is if you're using a blockchain and you're not spamming the network, you should have predictable low fees. And that, it's in times of congestion, we've all seen in the Ethereum space, $300, $1,200, like, it's impossible, right?
Yeah.
And just for the vast majority of people, like, you can't participate, right? And this is the big open access thing. And Core will be the first EVM ecosystem that comes out with this. It should be early next year. And we're super bullish on it. And you might ask, well, is that antithetical with platform revenue? And in some ways it is. But this is a long-term strategic place to get real volumes of real users. And I think that's definitely missing. And when you look at TRX volumes on Tron, easily the largest USDT, whatever, it gets to $5. And it's like, that's a competitive pressure. There's almost too much demand already. Needs to go to some other ecosystems, and we think that's going to be core.
The space is changing. Elections come, gone. SEC, change. We're bringing so much change into the space right now. So many players are adopting it and pretty much standing on top of every hill and yelling. Microsoft wants to get involved. Amazon wants to get involved. Everybody wants to have a piece of it. How does Core fit in? Where does Core fit in?
So I think we're going to continue to see a pattern of Bitcoin treasuries. Like we'll see these strategic reserves and all that sort of thing, but I think you will see more and more companies that are putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And that was a meme for a while. I think now you're going to see it more and more as like, it's actually a good idea.
Exactly.
And I think we fit in as a financial product for these folks, where if you want to be long Bitcoin, you now have other ways to go put your Bitcoin to work. If you want to go dual stake that and use those rewards to go do that, you can do it. If you want to sell those rewards to cover operational expenses, you can do that as well, right? Like we're unopinionated when it comes to these.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be very important because we've seen spot Bitcoin ETFs 100 billion plus in inflows, right? We blew away even the most bullish analyst expectations. That's just the beginning of Bitcoin structured products, Bitcoin finance. And Core is here to power that. Like, and I've made it no secret that we want to be powering the ETFs in, let's call it 2 to 3 years, as soon as staking is viable on these ETF products. But that's just the beginning. Like when Bitcoin structured products comes in, when Bitcoin derivatives come in at scale, you're talking asset classes that are in the tens of trillions. Like you're just based on the size of Bitcoin and the way derivatives markets work, it's going to be absolutely enormous. And that's a very interesting spot for Core to be, is this proof of stake layer on top of Bitcoin. So it's very early in this whole story, but we're here for the long run.
We've talked about for 20 minutes now. If I ask you the first question I ask you, would you give me the same answer? What do you want them to take away from today?
So I think I've had like a pretty good through line throughout the entire thing is that we're pretty consistent. What we say is that we're so early. And I think this we're so early applies to also Bitcoin holders, right, in general. And I think this reshaping of the world based on Bitcoin is going to happen, and we're here to power it. And that's a super exciting journey. All the metrics are great so far, but it's still just such early days. And that's what gets me out of bed every day and what keeps me up at night. And I think it's just an amazing journey that we're all on here together.
Last question. What would be the guiding principle that you apply when it comes to Core?
So people have probably heard me recommend this book like 15 times in the past because I'm a broken record with it. Yeah. But I really do believe the book Finite and Infinite Games changed my life in terms of how I think about game theory and how I think about relationships. And I think in crypto in general, most people view deals as heads I win, tails you lose. Versus in more general BD, it's all about win-win relationships and doing things the right way. Even if it means going slower or these sorts of things, sometimes momentum works, it compounds. And that's been the Core journey. It's been chewing glass for the last several years. Yeah. But it's really compounded on itself in a way that it is positive sum, the pie is expanding. And we're being able to find these really amazing long-term partners. And that would be my advice to every crypto builder, is just not by being like a total POS. You're above like 80 to 90% of the people in the space, which is horrible. Yeah. But in general, that attitude has been really amazing. And it's been brought throughout the Core culture. We've been able to bring on so many amazing folks here. But that sort of ethos is really, really powerful, and it has compounding returns to scale.
So my takeaway is build the right connections, build the right relationships, foster them, and you'll go far.
Much more succinct way to put it.
Wonderful. Thank you.